Okay, we are recording. Dave Rountree, how are you today?
Good, thank you.
Good, good, good. Well, look, before we do anything, I was so excited about this anyway. But then there's been the added excitement. I've seen this morning you're off to play Wembley Stadium.
Yes, who knew?
Is that a first for Blur?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those one of those few gigs really in the UK that are iconic in the same way that Madison Square Garden is, the Hollywood Bowl is, Budokan and Tokyo. And we played all those other places, so
Yeah,
it was. To get the offer to do that, it was very hard to turn that down, even though it's a difficult thing to do these days, playing shows. There was no Brexit as and various other things have completely trashed the UK touring industry. So it's hard to find coaches, lorry drivers, hard to find stage crew, hard to find venues. So yeah.
I mean, just to touch on that, you said that about playing Madison Square Garden and things like that. For a band that's achieved so much, do you still kind of have that? Oh, Wembley. Oh yeah, yeah. I'll do that one.
Yeah,
Like,
it's Wembley, isn't it? So had they said, the Brighton football stadium or something, we'd have gone, oh, yeah. Nothing against Brighton, but
yeah,
it's not got that kind of iconic thing about it, has it? But
yeah,
Wembley, as we've got very little to prove these days. We've done everything there is to do as a band. We've had the hits and played the shows and festivals and all of this. So to sort of tempt us back out again as a unit, somebody's got to come up with an interesting idea, really.
yeah.
So it was the start of those British summertime festivals, which were actually called that at the time in 2009 in Hyde Park, that first made us think, well, that's like our local venue, really, Hyde Park. So that's what first got us interested again. And there was 2012, the Olympics. Then we got asked if we wanted to play the party at the end of the Olympics. Well, who can say no to that?
Yeah.
And so, various times people have come up with interesting ideas, interesting things to try that we haven't done before.
One of the things that you touched on there about things that had affected, the infrastructure for touring bands and things. Another thing that massively impacted on that was the pandemic. And just to sort of ask you to cast your mind back to that for a moment, Dave, how did you find those sort of 18 months as well, both as a human and professionally as well?
Well, as a human, obviously, as with everybody, it was a difficult time. I lost relatives, and the isolation was difficult. I mean, I live out in the middle of the country, so I'd sold my London flat shortly before the pandemic, and moved permanently out to the country. So had I been stuck in my one bedroom flat in London, it would have been a whole different
Yeah,
pandemic experience. God knows if I could have actually coped with that. I would have found that very, very difficult. But so it was easier being out in the country for definite. Um, but in the early days, we didn't know what was going to happen, did we? We thought everybody might die. We thought that might be the end of the world. It wasn't clear, even to politicians weren't saying that wasn't true.
yeah.
Nobody knew what was going to happen. And when I had my first dose of the vaccine, I burst into tears. I was so overjoyed and so
Yeah.
grateful to the scientists who'd worked so hard to make that happen. I suppose one upside of the pandemic turned out to be, because I was working on some TV shows at the time, and that's kind of my day job, really, or has been my day job for the past 5 6 years. And of course, the film industry ground to a halt, as all other industries did. So that work dried up, which could have been a terrible downside, but that's what spurred me really to getting my album done. It had been a vague plan for quite some time, But these things always give way when somebody comes in offering paid work. You know, your kind of your sort of vague deadline-free solo project always takes a backseat, and that's the reason it hasn't been done for all these years. So, the producer Leo and I were been chatting about working together, and you know, never quite happened. And then the lockdown, it was lockdown 2, I think, happened again, and the things got pushed back again, and so we just thought, I'll tell you what, it's obviously not going to happen in the short term, but let's just, but we've neither of us got anything to do. Let's just start doing some preparatory work on the album. We'll start getting things in shape so that when we're allowed back in the same room together, we can just kind of motor on and get it all done. Yeah. And kind of 2 months later, the album was finished. It turned out to be a very productive way to work. We both have perfectly good studios that we could work from, both got lots of gear to work with, and we would get together in the mornings over Zoom and chat about the day's work and allocate tasks, and then just swap files throughout the day, swap MIDI files, swap audio files, and it was obviously, if we were working at double speed compared to had we been both been working in the same studio. Yeah. So it was actually, even though I don't think I would want to make another album that way, it actually turned out to be a very good, if I do it again, I would do it in a more hybrid way, because you do miss out having that kind of human interaction, bouncing ideas off somebody. There's no substitute for that. And, getting ideas at the end of the day, once you sent your files off, is no substitute for getting feedback in the minute, going, oh, no, don't do that, do this, try that. I've got a great idea, So we missed out on that kind of thing, or, those had to come from ourselves, really. But I think had I been less experienced at music making, obviously less experienced at working in a studio, it might have been more challenging. But it was, it was difficult. The whole period was will go down. It's historically challenging for those individuals and for the country, wasn't it? That will get taught in schools for generations.
Absolutely. Well, let's start your playlist, Dave. And for track 1, I'm going to ask you to tell me the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
Well, I struggled with this one a bit, and this wasn't my first choice.
What was your first choice?
Well, I can't remember now. I went through. Well, I just started thinking about intros and what makes a great intro. You see, but in general, I don't think music should have intros. I think the music should start off interesting.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the worst kind of intro is, let's go 4 times around the verse, and then the vocals come in. That's the very, very worst. And, I used to have a radio show, and would have to would have the joy of listening to hundreds of new tracks a week. You don't get past those first 4 bars. If they go, right, 4 times around, then those vocals come in for the first verse. Bar 3, you've switched it off and moved on to the next one. So it shouldn't have, if it doesn't grab you in those first 4 bars, nobody's going to listen to any, especially today, where it's so, you don't have to get a record out of the sleeve, put it on the record player, put the needle on, you just go click, next. So
on that point, before you actually sort of tell us what your pick is, Dave, that's really interesting that you're saying, because I often talk to artists about that kind of the shortening of attention spans of generations, that more recent generations, and the way that they're consuming their music is through apps and streaming platforms, and as you said, they're not pulling vinyl out of a sleeve and things like that. So because for me, when I cast my mind back to growing up listening to the music that you've made, the intros are pretty on point, and there's some crackers out there. And was what was the kind of creative process at that point when you was making, let's maybe talk about the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 Blur records. Was getting on the radio a thing like that? Was it all about getting on radio? Was it about getting them earworms, grabbing people's attention?
That never had to be said, really. I think we all see that as the part and parcel of making pop music. That's the genre we work in. So nobody's ever had to say in Blur, I tell you what, let's try and grab them from the off. We always try and grab them from the off.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why people wouldn't want to do that. And intros aren't really part of the genre, but when you go back to the 60s, you go 1, 2, 3, 4 and start with the first verse.
Yeah.
Well, those Motown tracks, no intro at all. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, man. Off they go. Yeah. Don't go round 4 times around the bloody verse.
Yeah.
This is prog rock has one of the many things that prog rock has has done to the thing I love called music. Is these long, boring intros, self-indulgent intros. But anyway, there's never any reason to go 4 times around the verse before the vocal comes in. If that's all you got, bring the vocal in. Nobody wants to hear the guitar play the same chords 4 times. Just nobody wants to hear that.
Well, you touched on Motown, Dave.
Yeah.
So do you want to bring in your track that you're going to choose today?
Yeah. So this is it's Marvin Gaye heard it through the grapevine. There's no. It does technically go 4 times around the verse. But every single part is an earworm. It doesn't just play the chords 4 times. You're not sitting there waiting for the song to start. 2 beats in, you're on your feet heading for the dance floor.
Yeah.
It's a get what the hell are you doing sitting down intro. Get up there.
Yeah.
I don't care whether you can dance or not. Go.
It's pretty perfect, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's those Motown tracks were played by some of the greatest jazz musicians of the age, who were moonlighting at Motown as the house band. And so they had this astonishing virtuosity. And that when you listen to virtuoso players, often it's like with art, visual artists, sometimes you think, how have you managed to get all of that expressiveness in just that one brush stroke? And the same with these kind of virtuoso players. The less they play, the more they play, less they play, the more you feel they knew just how little they could get away with. And it's in pop music, it's the spaces between the notes that make you want to dance, really.
Marvin Gaye, in regards to that kind of hit factory that was Motown, I guess Marvin Gaye, certainly when we talk about having them instant hits, which Motown had a huge body of work of. But if you look at, I guess the biggest selling record in the Motown songbook is the What's Going On record, and which obviously, if I'm right, Berry Gordy was famously against and was like, "There's no hits on this. It's not that kind of formula that Motown was operating as," and it was this big, more proggy kind of experimental concept record, and then went on to be the biggest selling track. So I'm always intrigued with those other intros that work. And if you look at sort of Papa Was a Rolling Stone as well, very different to the stuff that the Temptations were doing prior to that, kind of started to experiment a little bit. But did you feel that with like maybe sort of some of the sort of the later albums after The Great Escape and things like that, that you felt like you wanted to experiment more and maybe move away from the sort of pop sensibilities of lots of the sort of previous stuff?
We've always tried to make a different record, really, to the previous one. Again, it's not something that ever had to be said.
Yeah.
We've never been that interested in repeating ourselves. I guess we got close to it once or twice, kind of, but yeah, I mean, the three of our records, I guess, were kind of a set, really, you know. But still, when you listen to the individual tracks, I mean, it's true within an album as on an album. Really, the tracks are always pretty disparate.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of music, the tone, and the kind of shape of things. So we haven't really wanted to repeat ourselves song to song as well as record to record, really. But yeah, I mean, overall, our kind of sensibilities changed, and you know, the music we were making on our second album was seen as radical, nearly got us dropped from the record label. You know, who famously came into the studio and told us it was commercial suicide. You know, and when we complained, actually, we thought it was quite good. He said, "Well, other people better agree with you, or you're dropped." You know, so when you listen to it now, it sounds relatively conventional, doesn't it? But the music at the time was very, very different. You know, that was an album that picked up conventions by its ears and kind of spun it around a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me, for track 2, Dave, the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
Well, it's very hard to say. All music has always had an emotional impact on me. So I kind of adjusted the question to be something that kind of made me sort of reconsider what emotional music might be. And you know, having lambasted prog rock, so I think it deserves lambasting. Doesn't mean that some of it isn't very good. So I've had Shine On, Pink Floyd. I mean, Pink Floyd really transcended that genre in so many different ways, and another band that reinvented themselves many times. And I very much doubt they ever got up one morning as a unit and said, "Let's reinvent ourselves today." I'm sure they just did whatever seemed most interesting at the time, which is how musicians, in my experience, tend to work. But yeah, it's very. I'm not somebody who's ever really listened to lyrics in music, particularly. That hasn't been the interesting thing for me. You know, the interesting thing has been the emotional impact of the music. That's what I've always wanted to get from music, is that emotional, that kind of, the best music kind of gets you in the guts somehow.
Yeah.
You know, in a way that music uniquely can, I think, certainly for me. Other people may find it different, but yes, and Pink Floyd, the lyrics made me sit up and think about that as well. So, but yeah, Pink Floyd, I've always found to be an incredibly well, what word could you even use to describe music like that? Transcendent, I suppose. It takes you out of the place where you are and plonks you emotionally and plonks you somewhere else. It certainly can do. Interesting though, because you have to be, you know, it's like watching a magician, isn't it? Really, you can watch a magician in two ways. You can watch it going, well, how's he doing that? Well, I know he's waving this hand and he's turned his side on, hiding the other hand. That's when he's doing the magic with his other hand. What's the other hand doing? Oi, turn around, mate. Let me see the other hand. Or you can go, wow, that person's floating in the air. That's amazing. Oh, wow. And let your mind be boggled by it. The similar is true of music, isn't it? You have to, it's actually an active process by the listener. You have to buy into the process, buy into the emotional transformation that's taking place, or else it's just wallpaper.
Can you stand back and appreciate the magic of music, Dave? In a way, by that I mean, for somebody that spends so much time in studios and deconstructing music and looking at the sort of separate parts of music, when you hear a song there, are you, you know, do you feel like you've seen behind the curtain, for want of a better description, and you know, you're picking it apart rather than just standing back and just letting it all, you know, hit you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, then that's a difficult thing in the studio because the deconstruction and reconstruction process leaves you with something that sounds rubbish. While you're making music, and there's a leap of faith going on. You're never quite sure if when you get to the end, you're going to end up with something that's good or not. Plus, if you've written the song, you've invested an amount of emotion in it anyway, which means it can kid you into thinking it's good when in fact it isn't.
I meant more that if you hear a song on the radio, like,
Oh, I
do,
see.
do, do you see, do you pick it apart, as a musician, or do you just let it wash over you as a whole?
Um, depends. Depends. Like the best music, like the best film scores, you don't even really notice what's going on behind the scenes, do you? Like the best film scores, you don't hear at all. You're just bloody scared when the monster walks in,
Yeah.
but you don't know why you're that scared. And when you see it without the music, it's like, what's that blob? What's going on here? What's the blob doing? Who's the blob? You know? But when the music's playing, it's like, oh, the blob!
Yeah.
Christ! Oh my God, I can't look! Oh! The best music's like that as well, isn't it? If you start to notice the drums, probably the drummer's doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Not always true. I mean, some music is about the virtuosity. Jazz is about the virtuosity of the players, isn't it? And heavy metal, to some extent, it is as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, in general, that kind of music that transports you like that, you don't want to see behind the scenes, do you? You don't want
No.
the fourth wall to come crashing down.
Tell me a song that reminds you of your time at school, please, Dave.
So I said The Sound of the Suburbs by the Members. I
Cracking.
had this 7-inch on clear vinyl in a picture sleeve, and the picture sleeve was interior. I think, if I remember rightly, it was a picture of a kind of drawing of somebody's living room with a TV in the middle, and the middle was cut out, and then the clear vinyl uh, went inside the sleeve so that you could see through that, and then the picture behind the wall, behind the record was the picture on the TV, so it kind of moved when you took the vinyl in and out. That was my pride and joy. I loved that. It just reminds me. I played it. I played it again. Actually, it's held up reasonably well in the way that many punk songs actually haven't. That and the
Yeah.
Sex Pistols also have. But yeah, a lot of it sounds very flat now, and you just can wonder how it made you so bouncy at the time.
How was school? Was it something you enjoyed?
No, hated school.
Why did you hate it?
Just so bored all the time. Just so bored.
Was
So,
you a creative kid?
um, I guess I probably was a creative kid that wasn't expressing his creativity in particularly well. All I wanted to do really was get home and play the drums. So I kicked myself really. I wasted my school days. Did the bare minimum I could get away with. Then went on to Thames Poly to study computer science, which was a subject I was also always already very familiar with, so didn't need to do any work really. So I wasted both of those.
Aside from like, when you was at school, did you know what you wanted to be? You said that you wanted to get home and play drums. Did it seem that was something that could be a career?
Yeah, there was always going to be a career, absolutely.
What, in
I was,
drumming? You was confident in that at a young age.
yeah, I was good at it straight away. You see, I was utterly obsessed with it. Spent all my time practicing. So I did the 10,000 hours you need to do quite quickly. Probably in the first month, I did my 10,000 hours. I was no, within 2 or 3 years, I was good enough to do it professionally. I would say, and I was still a young kid. I was kind of tiny kid with a shock of bright red hair, kind of playing jazz with adults and playing in orchestras and brass bands, pop music, everything.
One of the reasons I set this podcast up, Dave, was through myself being from Essex and growing up in bands and things like that, and always feeling that that pressure, and speaking to other musicians from Essex as well, I was going to initially base it on my home county, and ask about that constant thing of like, oh well, you're going to move to London, then you got to move to London if you want to make it, and I always sort of feel like, well, why should you? And where I want to go with that is, did you feel that there was a scene where you grew up that, was there something in Essex that made it think, oh yeah, we could make it here?
There definitely was a scene growing up. There were pubs and clubs and bars where you could play, but there was no sense that that was the foundation of a career.
Yeah.
You would never get noticed playing in the Essex venues. You had to, if you wanted to get noticed by the industry, you had to play in the pubs where the industry were drinking, and that was in London. And Colchester and all those towns 100 miles from London have always suffered from that. They're just not far enough away, like Manchester, to have its own built-in music industry that are going to the Manchester clubs. And so it's not just true of the music industry, it's true of all kinds of things. Why wouldn't you go to London? It's close enough to commute. Why wouldn't you be in London? So it's a shame, but I think it's just to do with the geography, really, and the electrification of the railways. That's what I blame. It's the electrification of the railways. My dad worked at the BBC, and he commuted every day of his working life from Colchester to London, to Liverpool Street, and I remember his journey getting quicker and quicker and quicker as I grew up. It was an hour and a half when I first remember him doing it, and it was 40 minutes. By the end, it was got 50 minutes or something, under an hour. And it takes you. At one point in my life, I lived in Hampstead in North London. It took me an hour to get from Hampstead.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you move to Colchester? All things being equal.
Was home in Colchester a musical place, aside from your thousands of hours of drumming every night? Like, apart from that, was you brought up around music?
Well, both my parents were classical musicians, but both of them had quit the industry for various reasons, and so had kind of turned their back on it to some extent. And so my dad anyway carried on making music as a hobby. My mum was a violinist who spent her entire childhood training for a job in an orchestra, turned up on her first day at an orchestra and went, oh God, it's going to be like this. Put the violin down and never picked it up again.
Really?
Really, yeah. It was a horrendous place to work. And she was a young blonde woman in her 20s in the 1960s, and this awfully misogynistic environment of an orchestra. So she thought, sod that, for a game of soldiers. Yeah. And so they both told me not to do it for as a job, to do it, keep it as a hobby. They said, if you keep it as a hobby, you'll love it forever. If you do it for a living, it'll chew you up and spit you out. So, of course, I completely ignored them. It was all I wanted to do, really. I trained as a computer. My dad was instilled in me a love of electronics and computers. That's sustained me to this very day. So that's my original career. That's what I professed was going to be my original career. And in fact, the first jobs I got were in that field, but it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And in fact, working as a computer programmer almost killed off my love of computers, whereas working as a musician has never killed off my love of music. Turns out being a commercial computer programmer is not all it's cracked up to be. Whereas a commercial musician is.
Tell me what the first record you remember buying was.
Well, I think it was the Jungle Book soundtrack from Man's Music in Colchester that used to have a record department right at the back of the shop. I went to school with Timothy Mann, whose father started Man's Music, and he now runs it. I was in Colchester the other day. I popped in. I said, Timothy Mann wouldn't happen to still work here, would it? And turned out I was talking to his son.
Wow.
Tim was at the back of the shop. I gave him a big hug. Told him I loved him.
Oh, wonderful.
So I think it was that. I think I went in with my mum and we bought together the Jungle Book and I played it to death. What great songs!
Oh, incredible.
Songs.
And that sort of love of the records that you bought as a youngster, and being independent artists move, as your career started, and then becoming legitimate pop stars and such, all the way through that journey. Like, how important, and to this day, how important is the record shop for you?
These days, less important, but in the when I was a kid, that was really the only way to hear new music. There were very few radio stations. The ones that were very, very formulaic and playlisted. And so, you would hear new music on Top of the Pops, or you could go into the record shop, you put some headphones on and play an album, terrified that you were going to scratch it because you didn't have enough money to buy it, which is what you had to do if you scratched it. And but it was really the only way to hear new music. You get booted off the record player after 30 minutes. And it was the focal point of the music interested community, really. Your friends would be there, you would meet people there, you would discover shared loves of music there. It was a communal, one of the communal things that made music a hobby in those days, in a way that it isn't really now. Gig going and festival going especially is a hobby now, I guess. Yeah. But in the old days, music listening was a hobby because it had things of that kind of social nature. Music was expensive to consume. It's very, very cheap to consume now. So, your album collection would be a prized individual things that you sweated your socks off to be able to afford, and you would be jealous of albums your friend had in their collection, and you would all go round to listen to each other's records because you didn't have them yourself, in a way that must seem incomprehensible now to people, to kind of kids now growing up in this age of infinite music on tap, disposable music. But yeah, music was a hobby in those days, and the record shop was a part of that.
Have you achieved like ridiculous, things within music? And you touched on something a moment ago. You mentioned Top of the Pops. Now, I know that you was on there countless times. Tell me about the excitement of going on for the first time, and what you remember about the first time you went on Top of the Pops. And did it deliver? I mean, I presume you grew up watching Top of the Pops, obsessing over it as we all did.
Now, I have to say, that was all a long time ago. The first we went on Top of the Pops.
What was it? Would it have been There's No Other Way?
Oh, probably. Yeah. Probably. But it went through phases. I can't remember the details of the individual performances. Really, you would think I would be able to, but there was a lot going on in those days, and that was just one of the many things we had to do that week. But on the upside, it was a very easy day because you mimed, basically. So they had these special drum kits that were with special heads on and didn't make any noise, and special cymbals that just went clank rather than smash. And other than, the lead guitars weren't plugged in, everybody was miming the vocals. So there was no drama in the same way that there is if you're going on stage. It didn't matter if you messed it up, so you could just relax. On the downside, it was a very, very boring day. You had to get
really?
there early, and you spent so long sitting around while the people in the control room obsessed over kind of camera angles and, God knows what they were obsessing over. So you had two or three run-throughs, I think, throughout the day. The BBC canteen used to be subsidised, so you would get your lunch for 23p. And so we didn't have two beans to rub together, so that was always a huge bonus, getting lunch out of whatever it is we were doing. I think you got lunch and dinner, actually. And then there was a subsidised bar that you could go off to later, again, where a pint of beer was 7 pence. So yeah, that was all the upsides. But yeah, it was a surprise as well that there were only actually about 20 people in the audience. So it looks like it looked like you were looking at the band over the front 2 rows of the audience. Actually, there only were 2 rows of the audience, and the applause at the end of every song was canned. It wasn't the 20 people in the audience applauding. It was a sound effect that was added on afterwards. So
Oh,
that
that's a
was
curtain I don't want to look behind.
it was odd. It was a very odd day. So there was no, as a result, there were only a few people in the studio. There was no real atmosphere there. So it was kind of hard to get that kind of gig feeling.
Yeah.
But then it would change. Over the years, it changed. Then the vocals had to be live. Then the whole band had to be live. Then everybody sounded awful. So it went back to miming again. And then that was it. It finished and there was no more music on the TV.
Mm. Okay. So got an interesting answer from you for this one. Song that soundtrack your years clubbing, please, Dave.
Yeah, well, I didn't really have years clubbing. I don't know where people found the time to go clubbing. I was always working, especially in the evenings.
Yeah.
So if I wasn't playing music myself and going to gigs myself, I was going to other people's gigs. So I
Yeah.
definitely didn't go out clubbing.
So was there never something kind of in the early days of the band and such when, gigs were done? Would you never go out sort of to clubs and parties afterwards?
Uh, Not really clubs where people dance, no.
I'll tell you what, I'll change up the question.
Yeah.
You like to go out and DJ. So you now play the records in the clubs. So what's a record that is never out of your record box that you guarantee? If you get in trouble, what can you pull out that will get you out of trouble? What's your get out of jail card?
Well, you can't go wrong if you head back to the 60s. That's what I've always found. When the dance floor flags, head back to the 60s. So the Monkees, the Beatles.
Yeah.
They both only have a couple of tracks that you can play, but they're both guaranteed floor fillers.
Yeah.
And then you have to. The difficult thing then is to weave your way back out of the 60s back to something more. You can't suddenly then play some kind of modern indie music
Yeah.
that sounds radically different. Everyone thinks, what's going on here? People start falling over. So you have to kind of subtly weave your way in and out of genres, really. So I've often found great tracks. I think Primal Scream are the ultimate band for weaving your way. They have a foot in both stools,
Yeah.
really.
They're
Play
perfect for
Primal
it.
Scream. They're kind of 60s. They're kind of modern. So that's how I get out of the 60s again.
And what's great about Loaded, if we use Loaded as an example,
Yeah.
not only is it a great bridging record, you can
Yeah.
also then disappear, have a wee, and get back because it's a nice long track as well. That's a
Yeah.
proper good one to have in a record box. Get you out of trouble,
Absolutely.
Loaded.
Moving on Up's a great one as well.
Oh, joyous.
They've got a bunch of them, but yeah, I've got quite a good emergency 60s collection, things that have worked over the years. But I tend to, because I tend to group records into threes these days. So if I can find 3 records that work well together, then that answers that question for the next 3 records of what am I going to play next? I mean, that's the panic thing for a DJ when they're standing there kind of looking quite busy. It's because they're going, oh my God, what am I going to play next? Oh my God, I've got 2 minutes. Oh, I've only got a minute. I haven't even chosen it. I suppose the ultimate thing is if you still can't decide, you just start talking, don't you? You pick up the microphone and go, yeah, it's very good to see you tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Well, I mentioned before we pressed record on this that you came to my Pink Toothbrush to DJ our 30th anniversary, and unfortunately I wasn't there that night, so I didn't get to meet you there. But I was there way back on was it the first Blur tour? It would have been the first tour, wouldn't it?
One of our very first gigs after we were signed, yeah.
What are your memories of that sort of first tour?
Well, we were experimenting really on that first tour. We just signed, and we sat down with the record company, and they'd said, look, nobody cares now if you cock it up, it's not going to be a big deal. Now is the time. If you want to experiment with the format, do it now. You won't be able to do it once you're established and things are settled down. People will be turn up expecting a certain performance. So we tried lots of different things. We tried different ways of staging it. We tried me at the front one gig. We tried, me at the side, us kind of looking side on or in the round, and all kinds of different things. We tried experimenting with different sort of sets, with all kinds of stuff. And one of the things we experimented with was a lighting. With lighting, we've always been big on lighting. I think it's one of these things that makes you don't notice a bad one, but a good lighting designer will transform a gig for you. So we had a very good lighting designer, Dave Byers, who's still a friend to this day, and he came up with a bunch of different ideas, some of which stuck and some of which didn't. But that first tour, he made these great big light boxes, kind of 10 feet by 10 feet, 3 of them that went across the back of the stage. And we had a guy called Ali Murdoch. No, it wasn't Ali Murdoch, but Ali Payne, that's right, who just wandered on and would change big transparencies hanging in front of these light boxes, not kind of in time to the music or anything, just kind of, it sounded on paper like it was going to be a good idea, but actually the fact that it was a bloke wandering on and off stage doing it kind of scuppered it really. Had we had motorized things, it might have looked quite good in a sort of not stop making sense sort of way.
Yeah.
But actually it just looked a bit weird. So that's, I think that the Pink Toothbrush was one of those gigs where we still had that, and we were still experimenting with stuff.
Wonderful.
But regardless of all of that, I think that first tour was really good. We were a hot new band, getting written about in the press. Everybody wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The gigs were still quite chaotic. I think still a lot of running around stage, smashing things, and kind of, all of that. Still played things at a speed that we wouldn't manage now. We still play. We always play things much faster at our gigs, but in those days, I think you could barely even hear which song it was. We were playing them so fast.
Well, look, let's stay in Essex for this track, and tell me a favourite song from an artist from your home county, please.
Well, I struggle for it not to be this track, because it's a bit predictable. But
well, what else would be in the running then?
Well, I mean, there's The Prodigy from Essex, another band that I absolutely love. It could easily have been almost any of their singles. Probably not Smack My Bitch Up, any of the other singles, but and there are some Sade from another kind of sensational singer, and there are a lot of more people than you think would come from Essex actually. I say Sade because she lived around the corner from me, and there's the band, the first big Colchester band, Modern English. I only have one big song, but boy was it a big song, But Ian Jury, I mean, I was then and still am now absolutely in awe of him and his band, and the tragically, my favourite song is his biggest song, "Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick." Well, is his biggest song? One of his biggest songs, certainly. So good, especially the chorus with that ding 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 kind of walking bass line. It's just
Chaz Jankel, unbelievable.
Yeah. I went to see them at one of their final gigs in the Jubilee Gardens at the end of was it one of their final gigs? It was one of the GLC were being abolished by Thatcher. And so they were spending the money they had left in the coffers like it was going out of fashion. And one of the things they did was put on mini festivals in Jubilee Gardens, which was the rather grandly named patch of grass in front of County Hall, and they put on a gig headlined by Ian Dury and the Blockheads. And I was wandering over that. I thought, that's a bit. They were playing some music beforehand, and one of the tracks they picked, when I got closer, I realised was Ian Dury, and I thought, well, that's a bit unfair, isn't it? Playing the record before the band goes on. Anyway, I got to the stage and realised it was the band. They were so good. I was indistinguishable from the record.
Wow.
I thought, oh, I see. Oh God, there's a whole other level of proficiency up way above the top one that I even imagined was there. I was like, oh Christ, they gave me skates on. They were so good, just so good. But
I got to see him. I went to the first Madstock concert at Finsbury Park, and I managed to get there nice and early and see Ian Dury, and it was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Unfortunately, man, I was stuck at the front then because I wanted to wait there for Madness, and in between Ian Dury and Madness, famously was Morrissey, who got coined and bottled, and he never turned up the second day for the next one. So I had to kind of just cover up for this like wall of bottles and coins and such. But it was worth it for Ian Dury.
Oh my God, who would have picked that slot? Oh my God.
Do you know what, Dave? The most genius thing I saw that day, and was as I was queuing up to go, it was a beautiful hot day. And there was loads of, I mean, this was what, 1991 maybe? And there was loads of like old skinheads that were all probably well into their sort of 50s and 60s back then. And there was some
being in your 50s in those days.
Don't, mate, don't. Like, I know now that was me. That's me going to these shows now. But there was this guy just sitting outside, and he had a beer crate just turned upside down, sitting on it with a car battery and a set of like clippers, with a little cardboard sign just saying "Skinheads a quid." And there was all these pissed up old men that were like, it'd been a long time since I'd had a skinhead, but I'd had a few beers. We're going to see Madness. This guy was making a killing. I imagine a lot of them got an earful when I got home that night. But just the genius of just getting all these pissed up old men and charging them a quid to give them a skinhead before they went in to watch Madness. Fantastic.
There was a really nice point around sort of ska and all of that, where the skinhead fashion, shall we say, and racism became disassociated from one another, and there were lots of non-racist and anti-racist skinheads, black skinheads. There was a lovely point at which the kind of the culture part of youth culture kind of reasserted itself, and Madness had a lot to do with that, I think.
Absolutely.
Ska had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely. Last track.
I'm not saying those 50-year-olds didn't then go in and beat shit out of somebody in the gig. They well have done. But they didn't necessarily by that point.
Okay, for the last track, Dave, tell me a song that you think many people may not know that you would like them to hear.
Oh, so this is so it's a track called Sleep by the choral composer Eric Whittaker, sung by the BYU Singers. And I came across this, bizarrely, I got sent it for my as one of the tracks to listen to when I was doing my XFM radio show. It's obviously completely inappropriate. It's a straight choral track, but really of all the instruments, the human voice is by far the best, the most expressive, the most delicate, the most emotive. And there's something, I've always had a real soft spot for ensembles where everything is made of the same kind of instrument, like an orchestra by and large is made of string instruments, and so of the same proportions, so the tones they make interact with each other in particularly interesting ways. They tend to reinforce each other rather than cancel each other out. Brass bands are the same. the brass instruments in a brass band are a special shape. They're oval, they're elliptical really rather than oval, and they're all in exactly the same proportion. They're like larger and smaller copies of each other. So the sound it makes, they're all producing the same kind of tone of sound. And so the sound that 30 players make sounds like 300 players when they're all playing well together. And a choir is another of these things. Chorists, singers, when they sing together, when it works, they say that it rings. And that's what they're talking about, that point at which all of these similar sounding things are in phase with one another somehow. Obviously, I don't mean they're physically in phase with each other, but they're all singing, and it's not all necessarily singing exactly the same note. I think some of it's to do with very, very slight dissonances that you kind of learn to do over time. But anyway, when a choir has it, again, you can get 30 people in a choir and it sounds like 300 people. And Eric Whittaker is the master of this. That's his gig, is assembling choirs and writing music to express that ringing thing when the whole thing suddenly becomes massive and dramatic and huge. And this is a track from one of his albums. He's very, very, very famous in the classical music world these days because of his virtuosity with all of this kind of stuff. But this track, Sleep, he does this just perfectly. It's the music itself is relatively simple. They're just block chords. It doesn't weave in and out particularly, but the chords are sort of reasonably A-level complex rather than O-level complex.
Yeah.
So it's still relatively simple. A lot of ninths and major seventh and things like that, but the effect is just mesmerizing, utterly transporting, and people need to hear this stuff. People think choral music boring. This is why choral music is not boring and has the potential to be some of the best music there is. It's the earliest music. Drums and voices are the earliest music. They both affect us deep down the most, in my view. It's interesting. I read a book about the evolution of the arts. That's one of the things it was about, was the evolution of the arts from our days as pre-humans, and what people have discovered about how these areas of our brain evolved, and it's all to do with the size of social groups growing and how to tie these larger social groups together, and how to give them shared experiences. And what it appears to be is that the first thing that evolved to tie these groups together was comedy. Making people laugh. It's a very, very good way to create social bonds. And I'm not talking stand-up comedy. I'm talking physical comedy. I assume. And the second thing that evolved was music, by which, of course, I mean a lot of percussion and singing and that kind of thing, rather than complex musical instruments came later. The third thing that evolved was language. Isn't that odd? Language came third. You would think that came first, but so music predates language. It sits deeper in our brainstem, the effect it has on us than language does. Certainly, that's true of me. And yes, choral music has the ability to, certainly again for me, to affect me deepest of all. Vocal music, but especially choral music. And I just think people need to hear this stuff. People need to hear how good it can be.
We make it a little easier for listeners of the podcast to go and listen to that. We put together a little Spotify playlist with all your song picks on there, Dave, that people can go and listen to. And once they've done that, what else can they expect from Dave Rountree from the rest of this year? Obviously, we know that you've got the Wembley show next year with Blur, but in regards to Dave Rountree, what's coming up?
Well, I've got another single coming out at the end of this month, which isn't far away now, is it? And then the album is out in 20th of January. I've got to do some more writing, really, because otherwise next year's looking suddenly rather full. So I don't want to end up at the end of next year without another album's worth of songs, because I want to get another album out in 2024. So also want to do some shows, some more solo shows. I did 3 shows, again, as a kind of testing the water, figuring out how it might work. I think that, you know, by the time I got to the London show, the Amira, I think I finally had figured out how it's going to work. And I'm really quite excited about taking this album out on tour. So the downside is there's only nine playable songs by a small band. The 10th song you need an orchestra for. So, and in fact a choir. So you can't get that on stage at the Amira. So, wait for my Albert Hall gig to play the 10th song on the album. So really, I'm going to need a bit more music as well. So that's another motivation to get out there writing.
Wonderful. Dave, it's been a real joy to talk records with you, mate. Thank you so much for your time today.
Pleasure.
And I wish you all the best with the record, and I'll see you at Wembley, mate.
Take care. Thanks very much.
Thanks loads, Dave. Cheers.
Bye.